Hello again guys, today I thought we'd take just a few minutes to talk about this little device. This is the OnePlus X. I received this device right around Thanksgiving of last year, and I actually used it as my daily driver device for, I'm gonna say, a month or a month and a half. So I have a pretty good baseline for this review. So let's just talk about a few key points about it and my opinions on it as a daily driver for me. First up, it is hard to talk about this device without talking about its design. It's extremely thin, it's extremely light. It has this beautiful glass on the front and back, and of course that OnePlus branding. Around the sides you get this really nice metal band, which, if you can see it, has 17 little rivets cut out of it, which gives it a little bit of a grippy texture, and there's actually just a little bit of a curve to both the front and the back glass, which makes the whole experience just feel that much more smooth. Now the problem with that, and sort of with the whole design, is it does make it kind of difficult to tell top from bottom, back from front, because basically when you go to pull this out of your pocket, which one is the top, which one's the bottom, which one's the front? Really hard to tell. When you install the included case, it definitely makes it a little bit easier to tell the front from the back, but you really shouldn't have to do that. I mean, there's not even really a camera hump to it, so when you just go to grab it out of your pocket, it's kind of difficult to tell. Beautiful, but difficult. As far as the performance as a daily driver, it does have the Snapdragon 801 with 3 gigs of RAM built into it, and it has been nice and performant, and there really aren't any big issues with it. I've used it for some light gaming. As you can see, I do have several games installed there, and it's not the absolute best out there, but compared to some of the newer chips, it definitely keeps up at mid-range. It scores about a 40,000 on Antutu, and I think the new flagships are in the 60, 80,000 range, some of them as high as 90 or 100,000, but there you can see the score I got on it the last time I tried, 39,805, and in terms of just ranking it, it's definitely not anywhere near the top of the pack. And while we're looking at the performance, the next thing to sort of look at is the display itself. That's the thing you're going to be seeing the whole time anyway. It is a 1080p display, and it's a relatively small display. I cannot remember honestly. I think it's 5 inches, which is really nice in the hand. It's not too big, but the display gets really nice and bright, has some excellent colors. I cannot complain in the slightest, and the viewing angles on it are excellent. I mean, just look at how far I'm able to tilt it, and you're still able to see very clearly what's going on the display, no matter where you turn it. As far as the sound, I am gonna make the same complaint I make about pretty much every phone that doesn't have these. It doesn't have front-facing speakers. It does have 2 speaker grills on the bottom, but only one of them is an actual speaker. However, that one little teeny tiny speaker does put out a pretty decent amount of sound when it wants to. Moving on to the storage. 16 gigs of storage. That ain't gonna do it. It does have a microSD expansion slot, which is very nice, but up until this point, it has not been extremely useful. There is the option, as you can see inside of the settings, for move to SD card, but I found that it wasn't actually moving the entire application over, so I wasn't gaining a huge amount of space back. So if I had an app installed that was a couple of gigs, whenever I'd move to SD card, I wouldn't gain a couple of gigs back. So at the end of the day, 16 gigs of storage does become a bit constrained. It's doable, it's usable. I've been using 16 gig devices exclusively for the last 3 to 4 months between this and the Nexus 5X, and I've been able to survive. But I would definitely love to see a higher baseline, 32 or 64 gigs at an absolute minimum for all phones. Moving on to the camera. The rear-facing camera is a 13 megapixel sensor. In good lighting, it can put out some pretty decent results, but I think you should be able to expect that from pretty much any phone nowadays. The video quality on the rear-facing isn't bad at all. The low light performance is pretty terrible. The front-facing camera, however, not that great. The results generally end up pretty overexposed, a little grainy, a little mushy. It kind of looks like a beauty filter has been applied to everything. And even on the newest software, there's a major issue with recording in low light, some massive frame rate drops. I saw it go down to as few as 9 frames per second at one point. But there is a patch on XDA to take care of that, so if you do have this device, and you have it rooted, and you have 2.2 installed, head on over to XDA to get that patch. Hopefully they'll be adding it to OxygenOS. And actually, speaking of OxygenOS, the newest update, 2.2, did bring along manual controls in the camera, so now you do have that manual option there, so you can set your ISO and your exposure and everything, shutter speed, and even your focus if you want to do that. So that is a very nice option to have. They also added in the ability to save to a micro SD card, which again should have been there from the very beginning. Although at one point I did see some really weird issues when I was saving to the micro SD card. It was cutting off certain portions of the image, like the left-hand side of the image, and I'm guessing I just had kind of a slower SD card in there or something, although it hasn't been an issue in anything else. It's a UHS-1 card. So that's a bit of software weirdness there, I'm sure. As far as battery life, there's not a huge battery in this. I seem to remember it's in the low 2000s in terms of milliamp hours. I'll have the specs and everything down in the description if you're interested, but I didn't really have any issues with this. It lasted the entire day for me, no problems. There were a few days where I would get kind of low, but I never ever had to charge in the middle of the day. But the really neat thing battery-wise about this is the standby time. You'd almost think this has Marshmallow installed on it, because this phone will last for maybe 4 days at a time on battery alone, as long as you're not touching it. Now the problem with this is though, if you do have to charge in the middle of the day, There is no sort of quick charging built in. It has a Snapdragon 801, but it does not have any sort of quick charge capability, so that's a bit of a bummer there. It also is missing a couple of LTE bands, which it was not an issue for me, but I've heard that there are a lot of people on AT&T and T-Mobile here in the US that it has been a major problem for. There were no places that I went that I did not have LTE available if it was available on other AT&T or T-Mobile devices. This is also missing NFC, which more and more has become not so much an issue for me, and it is still on Lollipop on Android 5.1. So perhaps I'll take another look at this when they do finally release Marshmallow for it. That's supposed to happen sometime in the first quarter of this year, I think. So again, whenever that does come out, maybe I will come back and take another look at this device, use it for another few days, not a few months. But all in all, for $250 investment, I think I definitely got my money's worth out of this one. There are a few gotchas to it. The camera is not the absolute best. The battery life could be better, but it's good enough. It's missing NFC. It doesn't have the latest software. There's definitely some software quirkiness to it. But for $250, you can't ask for a whole lot more. It's got an excellent design. It's got a pretty decent speaker, beautiful display, good performance, very much on par with what I've come to expect for a phone that is available for less than $300. So that is going to be about all for me for today. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. And if you'd like to receive my upcoming videos when they do become available, make sure to hit the subscribe button below this video. It'll also be on the end screen here in just a minute. We will see you again next time. And the last thing I wanted to mention today are these. This is a wireless outlet from eTech City, and for this one, the last time I checked on Amazon, it was $12 for the outlet plus the remote. I bought 3 of them.